suddenly what were rare and even freakish events are becoming repetitive. So, does this weather resemble the modelling projections for climate change? Lots of you have been asking us this, and the answer, it seems, is yes. In June 2015, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment found that climate change is the most serious environmental issue facing New Zealand by far, and by far is a quote. The Commissioner's 2015 report contains maps of very low-lying coastal areas, and that Edgecombe coastline is amongst them. So I asked Dr Jan Wright what we've learnt from the flooding of the past week.
Well, two things here really, John. That report was about the rising sea, which is one effect of climate change. The problem in Edgecombe, of course, is river flooding rather than sea flooding, although you can see from that map that there's a lot of very low-lying area around Edgecombe. But again, the increased river flooding is something we will expect with climate change, because 1 degree rise in temperature of the atmosphere means 7% more water in it. So the atmosphere will have more and more energy in it and more water in it, and that means more intense storms, more intense rainfall, I'm afraid.
So what do we do? Because there are communities that love where they are proud to be there, don't want to leave, but there is an increasing sense that actually the kind of flooding we've seen in Edgecombe, the kind of events that we're seeing in communities like South Dunedin and coastal communities in many parts of New Zealand will become more common.
That's right, but it will take some time, and I don't know how long it'll be before, can't say Edgecombe will necessarily be flooded again for a long time once they prepare those stop banks. But it's basically a general trend, and so we need to be thinking about, if we're going to build a whole new town or suburb somewhere, it needs to be a couple of metres at least above the spring high tide mark now, because you don't want to be building somewhere where all the infrastructure is going to, it's so expensive. You expect it to be there for a couple of 100 years at least. And so we do need to rethink it, because the world is changing. And the talking about this Edgecombe event as a 1 in 500 year event is really not appropriate anymore, because things are changing. So what is a 1 in 500 year event will become a 1 in 100 year event, then a 1 in 50 year event, and so on. So it's the wrong language. We need to say, a 1% chance of a flood of this kind, and then it becomes a 2%, then it becomes a 3%. So we've got to reconfigure the way we think about all of this, and reconfigure how we think about planning.
These are big conversations, aren't they? Because whilst we can do forward planning to prevent building on vulnerable, low-lying or prone areas,
yes,
the communities that are already there, what do we do?
I know, and I feel very much for them. I mean, this terrible tragedy for Edgecombe, and the people in South Dunedin too, very low-lying. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. That's the short answer. We need to think. Eventually, we'll have to think in some places about what's called managed retreat, but who is to manage that and where they retreat to are all questions that we need to start thinking about. In the meantime, yes, stop banks will be repaired, insurance money will be paid out, and so on. But we can't go on indefinitely like that as the problem gets bigger.
This is a strong piece of work that you did in 2015. Full of pretty explicit recommendations. Was there political buy-in? Is there political buy-in? Is there political will to address things which are still, setting aside South Dunedin and Edgecombe, largely abstractions and hypothetical?
Well, I think, let me think, how can I respond to that one, John? The recommendations were all to central government, and central government is relying very heavily on councils here. And they give advice to councils, give guidance to council, but it doesn't have the force of law. And I do think these are problems that are too big for some councils at least to start to grapple with. And so I want to see more central government involvement, more central government assistance. Very, very difficult for a local council to deal with these issues. I mean, I'm quite an admirer of the Mayor of Dunedin, actually, because I think he's fronting up very well to this and being very balanced in the way he's responding. So, but it is very hard for everybody, and particularly hard for the people who live in those areas.
Dr Jan Wright, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, this really is a fascinating and important subject.